Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Centering Intersectional Feminism in Philanthropy and Beyond. You are in the right place for that webinar, and we're excited to have you. I am Yvonne Sims, Educational Programming Manager at Candid based in Atlanta, and I'm joined by Ebony Carroll, who is in the background doing many, many things, also based in Atlanta. If you don't know Candid, we are the coming together of Foundation Center and GuideStar. In 2019, these two organizations came together and formed one 501c3 that has data, training, and a lot of information about the nonprofit sector. And this is one of the trainings that we do. We're really happy that not only are we doing fundraising and talking about the different things that are happening in the social sector, but we also are very much into equitable access. And we now have a team called the Equitable Access Team. And part of what we're doing is having webinars like the one we're having today. Yay, our speakers today. This is the best part. So really happy to let these ladies take over. We have Miranda McGelly here, Director of Policy and Programs for Women's Funding Network. We have Veronica Colon Rosario, Executive Director of Puerto Rico Women's Foundation, and Christy Slater, Vice President of Programs at Women's Foundation of the South. And I'm going to stop sharing and let them take over.
Well, thank you so much, Yvonne, and thank you, Ebony, and thank you to the entire Candid team for the wonderful introduction and the opportunity to present virtually today. Also want to express gratitude to everyone who took the time to listen in on what I know will be a rich conversation. As Yvonne mentioned, my name is Miranda McGelly. My pronouns are she, her, and I serve as the Director of Policy and Programs at Women's Funding Network. I'm a lawyer by training and interested in intersectional feminism and tools to advance gender justice, whether that be the law, philanthropy, or community action and organizing. I'll let my amazing panelists introduce themselves, but I'm just delighted to be joined by Veronica Colon Rosario of Puerto Rico Women's Foundation and Christy Slater of Women's Foundation of the South. For the next hour or so, we'll be discussing the importance of centering intersectional feminism in philanthropy and beyond. And I'm just going to take a moment to share some brief slides. So in today's webinar, our goal is that you learn more about Women's Funding Network through my brief introduction of the organization, but more importantly, through hearing from our two panelists who represent some of the incredible organizations in our network. Through the panel, we seek to deepen your understanding of the power and potential of women's funds, but also offer practical steps on how to partner with women's funds in your community. In addition, we'd like to highlight the importance of intersectional feminism, which will be discussed throughout the next hour or so. But to kick things off, I'll read a definition of intersectional feminism provided by United Nations Women. They define it as centering the voices of those experiencing overlapping concurrent forms of oppression in order to understand the depths of the inequalities and the relationships among them in any given context. So that's a lot of words, but it's really looking at the way that the multiple identities that people have show up and impact their lives, and understanding those who are most marginalized and most impacted, how we help to improve their lives, improves lives for everyone. Intersectional feminism is a central prism through which Women's Funding Network, or WFN for short, approaches our work. We are an organization with over 135 members in the United States, but also around the globe, with a combined $1.4 billion in annual grant-making power. We're made up of women's funds, like those we'll hear from today, broader gender equity funders and allies who believe and are committed to advancing gender justice with an intersectional lens, so connecting that to racial justice, economic justice, immigration justice. Our mission is to provide strategies, research, and resources that support the critical agency and influence of women's foundations and gender justice funders in the movement for equality, justice, and power for everyone. We offer in-person and virtual trainings like today, and more broadly, we have peer communities, we provide research report to our members and more. And we've also recently launched the Gender and Capital Leverage Strategy Design Council. And that is a design council that brings together movement leaders and larger national funders to explore how to deepen and diversify funding and different types of capital supporting women's funds on important work around economic mobility, climate justice, reproductive justice, and more. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about Women's Funding Network later in today's discussion, but now I'll turn things over to our panelists. And thank you.
Thank you, Miranda. If it's okay with you, Christy, I can start introducing myself and then start the conversation. My name is Verónica Colón Rosario, and I am the Executive Director of the Fundación de Mujeres en Puerto Rico, in English, Puerto Rico Women's Foundation. I've been doing this job for 2 years, but I have built my career in public service. I lived in DC 11 years, and I moved back to Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria back in 2017. And just briefly about the Puerto Rico Women's Foundation, we are the first and the only philanthropic entity in Puerto Rico exclusively dedicated to the issue of gender equality and fund organizations that serve, organize, and advocate for women, girls, and the gender expansive community. And I'll pass it to my colleague, Christy, to introduce herself.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Veronica, and thank you, Miranda, for inviting me, and Candid, certainly, for the opportunity to speak with all of you today. So good afternoon, friends. My name is Christy Slater. I am the Vice President of Programs for the Women's Foundation of the South, or WFS for short. WFS is a relatively new foundation. We were launched in August of 2021 and just recently celebrated our second anniversary. Women's Foundation of the South is focused on building the health, wealth, and power of women and girls of color across the American South. And Andrew, you want to kick us off in this conversation? Or I could share, I'm sorry, before we go any further, I would like to share that I've been a part of the foundation since its inception. I was part of the strategic planning and then joined the foundation as the VP of programs in February of 2022. But I've been in the field of philanthropy for 20 years now, and working in both state, national, and now regional foundations. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you all this afternoon.
Well, thank you so much. I'd love to just start off with a question for the both of you, and that is, I share the UN Women's definition of intersectional feminism, but maybe Veronica, you could talk to us a little bit about how you define intersectional feminism and how it shows up in your work.
Yes, I think, for me, intersectional feminism is something that we as feminists have been working on for a while, and it's something that we are individually aware of, that issues, and there are many issues that often intersect and can exacerbate inequalities. So for example, I come from the science and research community in mental health, and there was never anything more clear to me than the fact that humanity is a mix of a lot of things. Many variables can affect how this human interacts with the environment. So it really challenges the way we see results and measure impact. We can say, for example, that we've helped 40 women find employment in X sector, but did that result in economic mobility? Are we talking about women with children? Are we talking about people who have access or do not have access to childcare. And we're talking about people who have to move from the countryside to the metropolitan area. So those are all variables that you have to think about when you're talking about issues. So it challenges to think that, does it really mean transformation, change, and change for who? Like for who is this change? So it's all about awareness, and is to think strategically and intentionally with information about all the variables that could affect the livelihood of the communities we're serving. And how it shows up in my work. And I am going to use the example of Puerto Rico, and I appreciate being in these spaces because Puerto Rico is often not in the conversation in a lot of things. So I'm really appreciative to be here. So for me, using an intersectional lens also means recognizing the historical context surrounding any issue. This is why I want to give you this example of Puerto Rico and highlight why this is important. Here we have long histories of violence and systemic discrimination, climate and economic disaster, a corrupt government who is absent, especially absent after any disaster. We have lack of transparency, and all this exacerbates the deep inequities that we already have. And it creates disadvantages in among our citizens. So I cannot talk about this concept in Puerto Rico without starting with colonialism. Colonialism and ownership makes our people an afterthought, basically human for critical trials. Like, for example, did you all know that women, a lot of women in Puerto Rico were forcibly sterilized? Many years ago, they were also used for experimenting birth control pill and Oxycontin. So it's just to give you a context of the value of life that people who reside in a colony and are Latinx minorities have to go through. And that all plays a role in the inequities. So we are a US territory. That means property, and that we're owned and controlled by another entity, both politically and economically. And we're sequestered from the geopolitical agenda. We're invisible on purpose because no one wants to admit ownership. The problem is that it has adverse effects for our economy, our political situation, and there's a lot of money being invested in selling Puerto Rico as a paradise. But a paradise for who? Because we cannot afford living here, and it's really difficult living here. And this is why people leave. So public policy here is being shaped to bring investments and benefit a few, with the clear goal of continue displacing us, making Puerto Rico whiter and wealthier, but not with Puerto Ricans. And I'm saying this because, for example, for me as a foundation, when we are working with organizations that support survivors of gender-based violence, we have to understand that they are also dealing with this displacement, with inflation, with increasing cost of property that makes it impossible for them, for example, afford transitory housing. We have organizations that have to work with women that, on top of having to heal from coming out from a cycle of violence, they have to heal in an environment and a system that continues to be violent against them. And another example, these policies are displacing the policies to bring outside investment, outside wealth investment, are displacing the Black and Dominican the Dominican communities from Santurce. Santurce is a town close to San Juan, which is a town I'm sure everybody knows about Puerto Rico. And Black women dominate the statistics of people living under the poverty line. So now you're seeing how displacement, economic mobility, all has an effect on the livelihood of the women we serve. So feminists in Puerto Rico had this figured out a long time ago. They had to advocate for issues beyond women and girls. They had to fight displacement, attacks against the LGBT communities, colonization, racism, a bad economy, corruption, and now political fundamentalists and conservatism, because it all affects gender justice and the work that we do to achieve gender justice. So they get the intersection and how it affects gender equity. And that's just, I'm gonna let Christy talk more about how she sees it and how she defines it. But that's just basically, a brief snapshot of how we see it in Puerto Rico. And just to summarize it, when we work for gender justice here, we really have to look at the whole historical, political, economical, even climate change situation that we're dealing with in this island. We have an already vulnerable population that it's just the situation is getting worse with every climate disaster. And internally, we haven't put our infrastructure at a level to survive that.
Thank you, Veronica. At Women's Foundation of the South, we, I think I won't give a new definition. I'll just kind of piggyback on what's already been shared, in that, the folks that are most proximate to the challenges are also most proximate to the solutions, right? And so we are looking at whatever issue your foundation or your organization is working to address. Look at who is most impacted, who is most proximate in those communities that are facing issues with housing or education or workforce or climate. And then take a look at the data and see who is most impacted by any challenges in any of those areas. And so when we look at if we look at all of these things, all of these issues and where they intersect, we see that oftentimes it's women and women of color that are the most negatively impacted in each of these areas. So what we took a look at was the Ms. Foundation's Pocket Change Report. And I don't know if you've seen this. If you haven't, I highly recommend you take a look at it. So Ms. Foundation launched the Pocket Change, How Women and Girls of Color Do More with Less report in, I'm going to say it was July 2020 when it was launched. And in that report, it showed that of all philanthropic giving, that the national average for philanthropic dollars that go to support women and girls of color was $5.48. And then they broke it down further into regions. So in the Northeast, it was $10.31 per woman and girl of color. In the West, it was $6.01 per woman and girl of color. The Midwest, $2.99, and for the South, it's $2.36. So I used to frustratingly joke that we are trying to get to systemic change with $5, but actually in the South it's $2.36. And what the report further uncovered was that if a nonprofit organization is led by a Black woman, then that number is often cut in half. So how do you get to systemic change in the Southern US with $1.15? That's what we're looking at. And so that report, that data, and also the lived experience of the leaders that launched Women's Foundation of the South, collectively, we are looking at over 100 years of experience in the philanthropic sector. And what we've just known anecdotally in the foundations where we each came from was that how challenging it was to get resources into the hands of nonprofit organizations led by women of color. And we wanted, in launching this foundation, it really was to address that. And we know if organizations led by women of color or movements led by women of color are achieving great things in whichever sector they're in, what could they do with more? They're already performing at high levels with less resources than their white counterparts. They're and also depending on the region with just literally pocket change. So what could you do with more resources? And that is what's shaping our work. Beyond that, we are focused on building the health, wealth, and power of women and girls of color. If these are the people in our communities that are having the greatest barriers to opportunity and to thrive, then how can we remove those barriers, and what do our communities look like when every family is able to thrive and fully participate in the economy and serving their communities?
Thank you for that, Veronica and Christy. Was really excited that you both agreed to participate in this conversation. And I think there's many parallels and many differences between Puerto Rico and the South, but also between you two individually. Veronica, it's my understanding that you started your work at Puerto Rico Women's Foundation in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria. And Christy, you started your philanthropic career in the aftermath of Katrina. So I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit about how those disasters impact your work, and also how, as intersectional feminists in the philanthropic space, we think about moving beyond responding to disasters and investing in long-term change.
Yeah, I would love to take credit for the creation of the foundation. I just started 2 years ago. We're also, Christy and I have a lot in common. We returned to places where after a disaster, our foundations are relatively new. Our foundation was, the idea came from New York, from powerful women in the New York diaspora who really wanted to, they knew that after climate disaster, it is women's organizations that receive less funding. And because we did not have a local fund for women and girls, the president of the New York Women's Foundation said, why don't you create this fund? And I had the privilege of joining them 2 years ago. And I think, when we talk about climate disaster and the situation of climate response, we have to be really intentional of how we think about the funding, that it's sustainable, because a lot of foundations come and they respond to the immediate need, and because you don't look at this intersection of what was happening before, again, the historical context of Puerto Rico, the data on Puerto Rico on poverty, the data on economic mobility, the data on migration, even the data on our aging population. We have a problem of aging population because a lot of people, they don't want to have children, or they want to move away because, again, you cannot afford living here, or it's impossible to live here. So I think it's very important for funders to do what we as feminist funders do for a living. This is our bread and butter. We look and we listen. And when we do, we are aware of how this all works together. And at least in our case, in the case of the Puerto Rico Women's Foundation, we do our funding very intentionally. We don't want to give money and forget. We invest for the sustainability of the organizations that I know that in the future are the ones who are the forefront at responding at any disaster, because here we call it social climate disasters, because last year we were hit by a Category 1 Hurricane Fiona, and on day one it was completely blackout in the archipelago, in our island, because that's how weak our infrastructure is. So these are all things that come together. And as feminist funders, we're trying to change that relationship between grantee and funder. And we are talking about shifting power. and listening and getting the resources they need to do the work that they tell us they need to do, and not throwing a call for proposals on something that we think it's important for the community and having them apply just because they need the funding, which is something that I've been in my conversations with grantee partners, is something that I've been hearing a lot. So I think that the fight for humanity and human dignity will never be a single issue problem. The fight for gender justice does not have a single issue solution. So beyond that, what my recommendation to funders and organizations that are listening and talking to funders, beyond that, any work that you do in education, in health, economy, human rights, and most importantly now on democracy, will have to have a gender lens, because that intersection a lot of times is missing in the work of social justice. And I think now it's more relevant than ever, because it is being used to build power in some other areas that are not necessarily social justice. So we really have to be very observant of what's happening around us. So we in Puerto Rico, and I do know that this is something that other women's funds worldwide do, we try to change the narrative in philanthropy with this information, with this conversation about intersections. But we also want to try to show that in the work they do, they have to pay a particular attention on how the work that they fund or how the work that they do will have different results if they really think with a gender lens. So if you're working on economic mobility, how does access to reproductive health care, access to childcare have an effect on economic mobility? If you're working in education, same questions, but also how education is binary, and does it include particularly women, some women in history? If you're working on climate issues, do you know, like I mentioned before, like women are the ones that suffer the consequences of all the climate disaster, yet they're the least funded, and they're also the ones doing the work on the streets. So we have to start asking ourselves these questions. How are we showing up in our work? How are we showing up for the work of social justice that we do as funders and as organization? Philanthropy has so much money that we could change the world, but we have to start looking at things differently. And I think that's what moves me in this job, and is what moves our foundation. And I know this because I have these conversations with our board and our grantee partners all the time. We want to do things differently. We don't have the resources to do that yet, because we're so new and we're starting in Puerto Rico. Funding, because of all this intersection and history and colonial situation, we're also invisible from funding in many, many foundations. So it's really hard. And I saw someone comment in here in the comments from Africa, and I've spoken with colleagues in different African countries who are also struggling to find funding. So where is the funding going? And is it really focusing on solving global issues, localized issue? Is it really working on territories, on colonial territories? We have to ask ourselves this question. And I think, my goal in this presentation and making my contribution was to make you all live with questions, but that's a good thing. I want you all to go back and be like, oh, I wonder if I'm having a gender lens in the work I do. Oh, I wonder what the colonial situation in Puerto Rico is, because a lot of people don't know, and that's okay. I mean, that's how they teach history, from the wrong side of history. But my goal here today is to let you go with more questions that you came, so you can really start questioning what you do.
Thank you, Veronica. I couldn't agree with you more on just about everything that you said. So I came to this work in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, which hit New Orleans in 2005, August of 2005. And prior to that, I was working in the mayor's office. I should have said at the top, I am from New Orleans. I am currently in a hotel in Dallas as we are expanding our work to Texas. But my role in philanthropy and becoming a grant maker launched in New Orleans, starting the Mayor's Office of Economic Development, focused on economic development grant making, supporting small business technical assistance providers. And then after Katrina, I needed to be a part of the rebuilding and for my own healing, and as well as to help to rebuild city that I love. And I think many of us come to this work because of our care for either the populations we're serving, the communities we're serving. And that's not without frustration, right? So if I look at the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina and all of the storms and climate related disasters that have happened in Louisiana and across the Gulf Coast, and certainly we're seeing more and more in places that didn't used to get hurricanes. I'm looking at California, we look at, but I'm gonna focus on Louisiana because that's where my most of my experience is based. If at any of the storms we had taken the opportunity to build leadership on the ground and had the folks who were impacted be a part of the rebuilding instead of you see license plates coming from all surrounding states all over the country, having those folks do the rebuilding and then go back to their states and go back to their communities. The dollars did not stay locally. We missed an opportunity to build a strong middle class and to move families out of poverty. And we missed that opportunity after Katrina. We missed it after Rita, after Gustav, Ike, Laura, Ida, BP oil spill, and so on and so on and so on and so on. And over the course of that time, I worked with the originally Louisiana Disaster Recovery Foundation, which is now Foundation for Louisiana. I became a program officer with the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, focused on the Mississippi and New Orleans team, and have been in philanthropic conversations and collaboratives, investing, guiding resources to New Orleans and beyond over all of these decades. And what I am still seeing is that while we do have philanthropic dollars that are focused on connecting folks to jobs, connecting folks to affordable housing, increasing access to healthcare, improving education, we also have philanthropic resources that are going to the counter of all of those things, right? And that are keeping folks away from power, that are keeping folks away from having autonomy in their own lives and being in control of their ability to thrive, just straight up. It's still, we constantly find ourselves having to get ready. And in those moments of disaster, policies are being created that impact folks far beyond the immediate aftermath of the storm. It impacts their ability to return. It impacts their ability to have a voice in what redevelopment looks like. It impacts their ability to connect to economic opportunities once they return. But those policies stay, and they stick, and they grow. So it's not just focused on the right now, it's the focus on the long term, and while supporting organizations on the ground, also supporting folks that are advocating for just policies at the state legislature and beyond. Every horrible policy that is impacting folks' lives now has originated in the South. And when it starts in the South, it expands across the country. So it's not just paying attention to what's happening in your neighborhood, it's paying attention to what's happening across the country and how the things that are happening in the southern states will start to amplify and have a ripple effect throughout the country.
Thank you both. One of the goals of today's conversation was to talk about what exactly are feminist funds or women's funds, and how are they powerful and what are their potential? And I think one of the sort of case studies where we see that is around the approach to responding to disaster, but with a long-term intersectional feminist lens. I also think there's some interesting success stories about the potential of feminist funds coming after the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'm curious, Veronica or Christy, if you kind of want to talk about the power and potential of women's funds, particularly coming out of that moment as well.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
You want to start, Christy? It's okay.
Okay. So I would say when we launched Women's Foundation of the South, August 2021, launched August 1st, August 30th, Hurricane Ida hit, right? And so what with being a brand new foundation and just really starting to build out the organizational structure, we're still very much in startup mode. The first resources that we received that had regranting, and we thought about what could we do that would have the most impact. So we did two things. One, we started by focusing on strategic communications. How can we get the word out about the organizations led by women of color that were leading the work, not only in the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Ida, but also who had been, as one of our grantees called it, the 911 of their communities, all throughout the pandemic, and had been just the cornerstone of their communities for just forever. And so we used our ability to get the word out to other funders, to get articles done, to get news stories done in order to address and highlight the work that they were doing. Not to send resources to Women's Foundation of the South, but to send resources directly to those organizations. And for a foundation that was not created by a wealthy donor, dead or alive, we have to raise the dollars that we grant out. For us to take a moment to shift the focus off of ourselves and directly to the grantees in order to raise money was of utmost importance at that moment. And this is I'm signaling this because I don't think it's a naturally occurring thought for a lot of folks in philanthropy to do that. So beyond that, once we got dollars to regrant, the first thing we did was offer folks a break. We created a program, which is now our flagship program, called Women of Color at Rest, or Woke at Rest for short. And what we did was invited several leaders. We started in Louisiana, because that's home. The foundation's headquartered in New Orleans, and invited them to a 2-day healing-centered retreat, and gave their organizations grant dollars to support the leader in a way that they best saw fit, as long as it was used for their leadership development and restoration. And that could look like a vacation. It could look like therapy. It could look like covering medical expenses. It could, because we first launched this right after the aftermath of Ida, some had to use it to help rebuild their homes or offices. And through that, we learned so much so that we decided that this would be our way to enter into community. So to date, we've launched Woke at Rest in Louisiana. Last year we expanded to Mississippi. This year we're expanding to Texas and Georgia. That's why I'm in Dallas right now. We are doing our Woke at Rest retreat with a cohort of Dallas-based grantees, and we'll be in Atlanta towards the end of the year. And the way in which we are doing this work, this investment in the leader, this investment in relationship building, this investment in coalition building, will allow for us to have a network of over 300 women of color leaders once we've made it through all 13 Southern states, that we come together and collectively build a strategy to build the health, wealth, and power of women and girls of color across the South. That will shape what our ultimate grant making looks like as we continue to build out the foundation, but it also gives us all marching orders that we can work towards in our respective and collective states. So this is how this work is. This is how these moments and these experiences are shaping the direction that the foundation heads. And beyond that, we are learning so much from our grantees. Just as Veronica mentioned, they are listening to folks. So some of the stories that that these leaders have shared about their own having to work, be the executive director of one organization, not collecting a salary, and having to be staff of another organization just to have a paycheck is far more common than we might think. But beyond that, the work that they are doing in their respective communities, we decided we needed to bring this to a broader understanding and broader attention. So we started an impact production series called Learn With Us. You can find those on our website if you're interested. We did 2 episodes on the maternal mortality crisis in Louisiana. We did 1 episode on speaking truth to power, which is about policy advocacy, and 1 on the power of community engagement. But beyond that, we said, understanding and hearing directly from these leaders is powerful. And not just the challenges they're facing, but the brilliance and the solutions that they're creating needs to be brought to a broader understanding. But what would it be to hear from the leaders and to understand and see their work in action? So this summer, we produced a docuseries called As We Are, which will be coming out soon, probably by the end of the year or beginning of next year. And we started with our grantees in Louisiana and Mississippi. We'll be expanding as we expand our work to cover the stories of women of color leaders in other states, so that folks understand who we are as we are and not as we are imagined to be. So it's not just grant making. I think it is the power of philanthropy to be able to shape and change narrative and to really highlight the experiences and the expertise of the communities that we are serving through the leaders that are guiding the work on the ground. I think it is both not just a possibility, but a responsibility of philanthropy to operate in this way.
Yeah, just again, picking up what Christy's saying, and same thing, there was the other day I was talking about grantee partners and how amazing they are and the power of their work. And someone told me, well, you need to be careful not to be seen as a pass-through foundation. And it really scared me. I was like, oh my God, is this bad? Like, I'm new in philanthropy. We're a new organization. We really had to look at, make sure that we're sending the good impression. But then I was like, you know what? We are a pass-through funding mechanism in Puerto Rico, because otherwise, how would the money get here? And only people who are not in a position of disadvantage of access to funds and connections, because we don't have an endowment, we don't have big private investment, we depend on foundations that believe in our work. And we are looking to diversify that funding, but it's really difficult when foundations tell you, well, you're not in any of our portfolios, or a lot of people still don't know what we do because we're new. But I'm sure, this will change. This is something that will change. I'm a very positive person. But I want to give you an example of a particularly, and something Christy said reminded me of this, of women working for free and as volunteers. And I had no idea of how many women in Puerto Rico were running nonprofits without salary. It's crazy. We have this organization called Casa Juana Colón. It's Juana Colón. It's a woman activist from the tobacco planting times here in Puerto Rico. She was a unionist, and she helped with, the progress of the workers in the tobacco industry back then. The money in Comerío, which is one of the poorest towns in Puerto Rico, and actually one of the areas where the Duke family made their money and launched Duke University. Part of the money was built here in Puerto Rico in the tobacco industry, something a lot of people don't know. So we have this organization in this town, Comerío, one of the most vulnerable sectors of Puerto Rico. More than 50% of the population living under the poverty line, an aging population. And the director of the organization was a volunteer. She was a teacher during the day. And for 16 years, this organization worked as a community organization with fiscal sponsors, of course, but all volunteer because they didn't have the funding to operate. When we started with them, I wasn't in the foundation then, but they had about $12,000 in their budget and no paid employees. We gave them funding to get their 501c3 and pay people for that process of acquiring the 501c3, because that's 16 years is a lot of time to report and get the 501c3. So this organization in 2 years has evolved to a point that this year, I'm sure they're going to close with their first $1 million in the budget. And this is a leader. This year, for the first time, we're able to pay her salary, and we committed to consecutive years. So we're very happy that we can say that, because that's what we want to do. That leaders of nonprofit organizations doing the work that the state is not there doing, that they get paid and get paid fairly and well. So for the first time, she's getting a salary, and that they are closing the year with $1 million and hopefully more. They are organized. Of course, I'm not going to take all the credit. This was not just because of our funding. We helped a little bit. It has a lot of factors. And in fact, we're going to launch a study on what was successful with this model, because we want to see what worked and how this model worked, so we can invest strategically on the organizations. If they are missing one of the parts, maybe we should invest there and help them on this side of the operations. Maybe we should bring training on this. So we are always listening. There's nothing I bring to the table that it's better than all these women can give. I saw it from day one. The only thing I'm here to bring is funding. The rest, they could run Puerto Rico if I let them, or if they have the funding, or if they have the infrastructure, which is what we want to do. So I just wanted to bring that example, because that is, for me, the most beautiful example of what feminist and women's funds can do, because we work with them and we do this process. In Spanish, we say a word, acompañamiento, which is walking through everything with you. We do technical support and capacity building. So it's not just about funding and forgetting. It's about funding and looking, how else can I be of support? Should I introduce you to other funders? Should I connect you with other people? Should I connect you to other feminist movements in Latin America, for example, because they have the same fights that we have here in Puerto Rico? So yeah, we are a pass-through foundation. A lot of the times, I think there's a lot of power in that, because we do know the power that we have at Women's Funds is that we take so much time listening to the communities that we do know where the money has to be invested. So when there is another disaster, I know that in Comerío, that leader now has a community kitchen and she's going to open it the next day. And while the government figures out when to bring aid, and money she's already feeding people because she has the community kitchen and $10,000 that we gave her so she can buy gas, food, or whatever she needs to open that kitchen on the next day. And that's what we do. We listen, we act, and we invest intentionally. So it's the progress and the social justice is in the hands of the communities.
It's really inspiring. Thank you both for this. You know, something that I'm struck by is that there are a lot of newer concepts in philanthropy at large that are maybe not that really new or embedded into what it means to be a women's fund or a feminist fund. I'm thinking of trust-based philanthropy as an example. I mean, I think we've heard about it today, but if you can talk about a little bit more about the particular approach to philanthropy that women's funds take, and what are the lessons for philanthropy at large there?
I'll start, and I'll share a little bit about how we find our grantees. So at WFS, like I mentioned, we launched in Louisiana, we've expanded to Mississippi, we're now in Texas and Georgia, and we'll be expanding to 13 states across the South. My entire career in philanthropy has been really based and anchored in Louisiana and Mississippi as well, to a lesser extent. But beyond those two states, we need to be introduced to leaders throughout Texas and throughout Georgia, through Florida, West Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky, all of those states. So we start with folks that we know in philanthropy, and we ask them, as we explain to them the work that the foundation is doing and how we want to enter state and how we want to enter into relationship in these communities. We ask them who do they fund, and equally as important, who can't you fund? But it's doing dynamic work in community. I feel like WFS in a lot of ways can say the things that some of our peers in philanthropy cannot. We can support organizations that, in a lot of times, for whatever reasons, a variety of reasons, other funders cannot. And so that really helps us to start to identify, beyond doing our own research. We want to enter into each of these states in a respectful way. We want to enter into these relationships in a way that pours into the organizations and the leaders and is not extracting, as we are equally trying to learn about their communities and what the needs are at this moment. It's ever changing as Supreme Court decisions come down. A lot of things are shifting real time. And I think I don't think this is rocket science. I think it is what's been said in this conversation since the very beginning. It's listening to the folks that are most proximate to the challenges. They're the most proximate to the solutions. And it's really just that simple. And then investing in them, trusting in them to do the work that they are already doing. I think where the challenge and the push for philanthropy is to trust-based philanthropy is a great buzzword, but the actual practice of it means this is an organization that doesn't look like your typical 501c3. They don't have the financial tools. They don't have the organizational infrastructure, but they have the impact in community. So what is it about your structures that needs to shift in order to really get the resources to the ground? I think that's the push. That's the challenge. And that's also not the sexy work, right? It's the, oh no, we got to look at what our grant agreements look like. We got to look at what our financial due diligence looks like in order to get more resources into the hands of the folks that are most proximate to the possibilities.
Yeah, I cannot say, just Christy said it all. So the only thing I am going to add is just one example of, after the Hurricane Fiona, the last one that we had, I had a funder that asked me to go to one of the grantee partners that we funded after the emergency to take photos. And I said no. I said, absolutely not. They are dealing with a horrible situation. This one in particular has a trunk of a big tree that fell in front of her house. Physically, there's no way I can get to her. And also it's very considerate, and we cannot think ourselves like that. We're not, and I don't see the Puerto Rico Women's Foundation as the star in the story. I see that we are a resource for local community leaders to do their work however they think is going to work, because I cannot tell you whether how to have an impact in a community that I have never lived on, or how can I have impact or with specific part of the population whose experience I don't understand. For example, the trans community, I can never assume what they need. They have to tell me, they will tell me, this is what I need, and this is how I have to work with my community, and these are the intersections. And I believe them because my expertise is not their expertise, and they're the ones that inform our grant making. So I think one of the benefits of women's funds is that we inform our grant making from grantee partners, and there is a trust that they do know what they're doing. And so far in all the funding that we've done, they've always been right, and we've seen the difference of what an operational grant can do in their work.
Thank you both so much. And I see that we have a number of questions in the Q&A. So thank you for folks who are staying around and engaged with questions. Maybe I'll turn things over to Yvonne for the next portion of the call so we can answer some of those questions and welcome you to submit more using the Q&A function.
Sure, thank you. I really appreciate this conversation. So I'm using the upvoting, so I'm gonna just read the first question here. Hello, what are your orgs doing to support the disability intersection? If nothing yet, Women Enabled International, where I work, and Disability Philanthropy Forum are great starting places to intentionally include women and gender diverse people with disabilities in your advocacy. And I'm just gonna let Miranda, so that Veronica and Christy have a moment. I'll let Miranda start with that answer.
Sure. And we were really excited to partner with New York Women's Foundation, Disability Rights Funds, and others to have a panel discussing the intersection of disability justice and gender justice. And we're looking to continue those conversations and those donor learning opportunities through our network events, both virtually and in person. So we're really trying to incorporate that into our programming and our policy work. And I just gave 2 examples, but also happy to continue to collaborate and work with additional partners in this space and discuss other ways that we might be able to deepen this work and make these connections.
Appreciate it. And Veronica, could you jump in?
Yes, Cheryl, I would love to get in touch with you and talk more about this. Right now, the one grantee, we still don't have that many grantee partners, but the one grantee partners that is really looking into this is La Sombrilla Queer, and I'll be happy to put the name in the chat right now. And they're working on the intersections of the gender expansive community and disabilities, because they face many they're invisible in general, and much more if they have a disability and they're facing issues of employment, which is one of the most serious situations, because that means that in some cases they end up homeless, or it is just a bad situation in general. So I would love to talk to you more about it. I always like to learn about the work that everybody's doing. We're also with the Women's Funding Network and following the conversation. But right as of now, the only grantee partner that is working intentionally those intersections, because our grantee partners serve women in all diversity and with all situations. But the people who are intentionally doing the work, and they mention it in the work, is La Sombría Queer. I'm happy to tell you more about them.
And I would say for us, since right now our grant making is only the Woke at Rest focus, and creating the retreats, as well as producing the docuseries, the way that it shows up is in our, I would say, paying attention to make sure that our spaces are welcoming, safe, and accessible. As soon as I saw that in the Q&A, I quickly wrote down the names of both organizations, because as we are starting to build out the programmatic side of the foundation, I absolutely would love to learn more. I want to make sure that we are being very intentional. So I really appreciate the resources as well. Thank you.
Thank you all. Anya Henry says, do you have any recommendations for how to address the challenge of implicit, internalized institutional bias and exclusionary policies within my communities, social services, nonprofits, and even our new Women's Fund? I have been working for years without compensation of any kind, support, recognition, or opportunities to lead, influence, despite completing multiple very expensive leadership training, certification programs, years of experience. She goes on to say, I'm intersectional in many ways, multi-ethnic, economically disadvantaged, ADHD, all of the things. I have managed to meet, achieve, although it has been extremely difficult for me to do so, only to be met with dismissal and yet more demands and expectations. Again, I'll let Miranda start. Since you're kind of over the bigger organization or in this umbrella organization, I wonder how you deal with that.
I wish I had an answer. I mean, I think that there's many layers to that question, and that's something that we're grappling with. We've heard throughout the course of the conversation that there are some sustainability issues as feminist funds and as organizers and community-based organizations we support. People working without salaries, people working in a way that's unsustainable, which requires the Women at Rest program. And so, I think the most honest answer I can give is that we are aware of these multi-layered issues. We're listening, and we are strategizing together as a network to see how we can make the work of helping others more sustainable, the work of advancing gender justice with an intersectional lens more sustainable. And happy to chat offline about the particulars of your situation, if that's helpful. If there's a particular women's fund that you're working with in your jurisdiction, but I don't really have a clean and nice answer.
I think that's why you exist, right? Because we don't have this clean answer. Christy, how about you? Anything in particular that you're, how are you busting them down the doors in the South and, having those kinds of conversations?
This is, I think this is the question, right? I think for the work that I'm doing now at Women's Foundation of the South, and the focus of the foundation, as well as the work that I've done in previous foundations, has been both to support organizations working at the grassroots level, so providing direct services, but also trying to support the policy advocacy space in order to not just shift policies, but also shift practices. And it is slow, right? This is you don't see the immediate relief in that. I think what in terms of more of an immediate response would be who are the policy advocates in your community that are working at with any of these issues, and who do they recommend, and who are they partnering with in order to push shifts at the state level that would impact social services? What are some policy advocacy folks that are working at the federal level in order to shift federal policy into a more equitable supports in the social services arena? There's not, I wish I had a magic wand. There's not one way to approach this, and it is going to require outreach to multiple organizations that are working in different components. I find a lot of the challenge with this is, and what we've been talking about, we're talking about intersectionality, but the reality is that a lot of the work is happening in a siloed approach. It's one issue versus looking at all the issues through how a human lives, right? And how these things all impact individuals. I wish I had a better answer. That's just kind of where I see things are at the moment.
Oh, we get it. Veronica, in Puerto Rico, what does this look like?
Yeah, no, this is unfortunately a very familiar story for many people, and it's sad that we don't have a, I don't have a straightforward answer. I think what said Christy nailed to the points, but I am going to say, in addition to looking for local resources and local leaders, one of the things that I do, because it is very difficult, and I added a new comment. It is very difficult to build a team to fundraise, specifically when there's so many challenges in the way. One of the things I do, and I'm sorry if this doesn't help you, I'm very annoying in the spaces that I'm not welcome, or the spaces that don't agree with my narrative. I'm annoying in a respectful way, so they don't even notice until they're tired of listening to me. And here I can tell you, with government services, we have a huge problem with government services in all the areas here in Puerto Rico. And I have been in many fights with local governmental offices. And one of the things that I have learned that they had not taught us is how to advocate for ourselves. And I think that's something that has been done on purpose. And with this job and with this experience, I have learned to advocate for me and for the foundation in a way that I make people listen. And I do my research before I go to a funder, or before I go to a government office, or before I go to employment. I tell them, these are your numbers. Supporting me will help you. So do what you have to do. And I've lost fear of telling people, this is your job. Like, you have to support me in this process, because otherwise I don't get to do the work that you're not doing as the state, and speaking on state level. So, and I'm sorry that we cannot answer that. It's a very heavy question, and I know we all receive it heavily.
Thank you. Do you find resistance to the idea of giving funds and power to the people closest to the problem? And since you're nodding already, Veronica, go ahead.
Yeah, sometimes, I mean, not from my board, and not from my circles. There's always going to be resistance, because philanthropy was created in one way, and fortunately it has been evolving and it has been changing, and now there's trust-based philanthropy. Now there's, we're starting to listen to the people, and I do sometimes find resistance, but I am fortunate that within the foundation, within the leadership of the foundation, we're all aligned. And that's something that is very rare, because I've listened to other organizations and other foundations, and it's really hard when you are big and have many years of operation. We are now building our story, and we're building the foundation that we want. And I think it is disadvantages in some ways because we're small, but it's also an advantage because we're coming in a time where philanthropy is changing and we can get on that boat. We don't have to change structurally anything because we are building who we want to fund. We are building this with the people that we want to fund. So our story is a little bit different. I do have one time, someone told me, because in our mission, we have non-binary. We serve women, girls, and non-binary. And I did have a situation with a funder once who told me, oh, we want to fund you, but you have to take the non-binary down from your mission. And I said, no, because I'm not willing to sacrifice my values. And that's the age that we're in. We don't have to sacrifice our values to serve the people that actually need the help.
I love it. Anyone else want to jump in before we go to the next question?
Yeah, I would say, fortunately, I have not had resistance throughout my career. That's not been the challenge. The agreement and alignment part has not been the challenge. The getting the amount of resources that are needed to do the work has been the challenge. Has been, like I said earlier, this organization doesn't have a strong board, doesn't have all of the financial controls. It's been, how do I help them overcome these infrastructure hurdles from a foundation's point of view, that their they don't meet the financial due diligence, markers in order to get the resources that they are requesting, which is what they need to actually deliver the work at a high level, right? That has been the challenge. Equally, what I have seen has been, so there's, I am a firm believer that there's always a way to win. And when you're in a box, there's a lot of space inside the box. So there's creative grant making. There's always a way to figure out how to get the folks the resources they need if I can't get it to them directly. So it's taken a lot of work in order to get dollars to the ground. But there's always a way to win. What I've equally seen is, while we are supporting organizations, so redistricting was a huge thing for Louisiana. There's a Supreme Court case that was about what was going on in Alabama. But in Louisiana, organizations that were trying to get the word out about the importance of redistricting, what it means for communities, what Louisiana is legally entitled to. That organization got $40,000 in resources to do a public education campaign. The opposition got $250,000 for the same type of public education, right? So it's the challenge is getting folks the resources they need in order to execute on the ground, while their opposition has no problem getting all the dollars they need in order to fight any progressive policy changes.
That makes sense. Thank you so much. And this seems like a good time to ask this question to Miranda. As you both mentioned earlier, a lot of funders require proof up front of financial stability and general organizational stability before investing. Does the Women's Funding Network require any kind of documentation up front, or is the funding generally more flexible in its requirements and therefore doesn't require a lot of documentation initially?
So just as a little bit of background context before I answer, Women's Funding Network, we are a membership organization of women's funds, women's foundations, and gender equity funding. We play a few roles to strengthen the women's funding and gender equity funder movement. And we do actually provide funding and support to our members. We primarily fund feminist funds, women's funds, gender equity funders. with the belief that they are understanding and have strong relationships with community-based organizations, grassroots organizing happening in their communities. So we don't directly fund those organizations. We rely on the expertise of our members and fund them. So yes, we engage in flexible funding practices, trust-based philanthropy. We do participatory grant making. However, just want to clarify who, when we do engage in funding, who the recipients are and have been.
Okay. So that's actually more of a question for Christy and Veronica then. So, and I'll let Veronica start.
Yeah, so we're pretty flexible. We don't request a lot. We request the basic. And you don't have to have a 501c3 to be funded by us. You can either have the local tax requirements or a fiscal sponsor. But we're also very careful because sometimes if you provide money to someone that doesn't have the infrastructure to manage it, you could be damaging them. So what we do give the funding even if they don't have the infrastructure or the documentation, but we tell them, let's work together and let me know how we can support you to get what you need. And we have paid for accountants and CPAs and tax experts to help them avoid getting fines, because the problem is that we can be as progressive as we want, but we're tied to the system, and there's really nothing we can do there. And and it sounds beautiful to give you money without thinking of what you have, but at the same time, I don't want to give you money and have the government fine you because you didn't report it. So we don't ask for a lot, but we also have a conversation with them one-on-one to make sure that they have the infrastructure to manage it. And if not, what is it that I can do to help you get there?
I would say for right now, our requirements are very, very simple. That and also because of the size of our grant making at the moment. So I want to be clear about that. So Veronica gave a very detailed answer and spot on answer in terms of it can be damaging if the organization is not prepared for to receive, the resources or have a fiscal sponsor in order for that to be absorbed. So you definitely don't want to tipping a 501c3 that's a whole nother conversation. So we definitely don't want to do anything harmful, especially as we are trying to support progressive work and equitable work. We definitely want it to be no harm. For us at the moment, because our grant sizes right now are very small, they're the organization, the grants for Woke at Rest are $5,000 per leader. And so with that, we are asking really the bare minimum. Is your organization in good standing with the IRS or a fiscal sponsor? Certainly we're asking, our application process, it's invitation only, but it's also it's a very simple, it should take 30 minutes or less to complete the application, because we just want to know about you, about your organization. And because this is focused on leadership development and well-being and restoration, really, the questions are, how well are you sleeping? How well are you eating, hydrating? Because of the nature of this particular program. As we build out the future of the grant making and starting to get into some impact investment into women of color entrepreneurs, it's going to get more complicated. But for right now, our requests and the information that we are requiring of folks is very simple.
Love it. And I just have to ask, because as Candid, we're doing a lot of listening to the community or reaching out and trying to figure out exactly where to go. And you mentioned that. So I know we had a couple of questions around, how do I get funded, right? Like, so how do I meet you? How do you meet grantees. So I'll let Veronica start. And I get it that you're all younger. So it might not be the answer we're kind of looking for, but yeah, how do you meet grantees? How do you find out who's doing the work?
So because, and I know Christy is in the same situation, we're both a fundraiser and a grant maker. So I'm going to answer how I fund and also how I get funding. Maybe some of the things that I do will help you. So we fund organizations. Puerto Rico is so small. There's only, so many organizations that do this work. The first thing we did was a focus group to understand what the needs were in the community so they can actively participate in the decision of how we do the grant making. And by no surprise, we found out that, the biggest need is operational funding. So we purposely had this conversation with a group of small emerging organizations that needed funding to launch. And we've met them through in these 3 years, either by they reach out to us, we have these informal conversations that then turn to interview, that then turn to also a very simple application process. But that's how we meet them. We go a lot to the field and we talk to a lot of people. How I fundraise is being everywhere. So you will find me everywhere. My idea of fundraising is that you get to know me and get to know the work I do in every conference and just like show up. And it's hard. It's going to be so hard, especially if you are in the South, the US, in the countries where the money doesn't get. It is very difficult, but I just show up a lot and I do a lot of follow-ups. And I study a lot, every funder, even if it's a 5-minute conversation, I do my research and I only talk to that person about the things that I think they're going to be interested in.
I like it. Thank you for the advice. Christy?
So I'm just going to recap a little bit of what I said earlier. We find our grantees through our networks and through our own research, but like I mentioned earlier, we ask funder partners in the states that we're expanding to, who is it that they fund and who can't they fund, and that's how we start to identify the organizations and the leaders who will ultimately become our grantees. Now, certainly there are more organizations that are supporting women and girls of color than we have resources for. So we are, while this might be the first cohort in the Dallas region, it won't be the only one in Texas and probably not the only one in this region. We are expanding state by state. And I think that, certainly same as Veronica mentioned, we are raising the dollars that we are granting out. Another way that we are further building out our programming, as well as trying to raise dollars, is through our annual gala. So we do our event called Crescendo. And it's a fashion show featuring women of color designers. And we celebrate all body shapes, sizes, hues, and expression. So it's a way to further tell our story and to further get resources out to support women entrepreneurs of color. So it enhances our programming while continuing to amplify the stories and the narratives of women of color across the South, as well, also hopefully bringing resources into the foundation so that we can continue this work. So that's another approach that we take with our own fundraising efforts in order to turn it around and re-grant it.
Make sure you're out there and people are getting to know you. Can we come to Crescendo? Like, is it in person or?
It is in person, but there's also a virtual option. So you can have a front row seat right in the comfort of your own home.
And I'm looking at the time and realize that it has gone very quickly. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate this conversation. People were very engaged and we're just so glad to have you. So thanks again all for being here. Miranda, Veronica, Christy, we appreciate you, and everyone enjoy.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.